Welcome to another installment of the Africa Frontiers of Innovation series. My name is Victoria Rubadiri. I'm a broadcast journalist based in Nairobi, Kenya, and I'll be moderating this very exciting session. Now, if you're joining us for the first time, this is a monthly online broadcast that explores the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on individuals, on sectors, and on economy. So this month, we are having a conversation that revolves around International Women's Day. And we're looking at women trailblazers in various professions who have chosen to challenge and to break the glass ceiling in various fields. I'd like to introduce them really quickly. Irene Ochieng is the founder and chief executive officer of Africa Women Innovation and Entrepreneurship Forum. We also have Aisha Ogier Kutta, who is a photographer and founder of the Center for Art and Creative Talent. Sarah Waiswa, who is a renowned documentary and portrait photographer. And last but not least, we have Gulshan Khan, human rights, social justice, identity, culture photographer. Ladies, thank you so much for joining this session. Really excited to get into it. And just before we begin, a note to those who are watching us on LinkedIn and on Facebook, if you have any questions or comments throughout the session, please share them in the comment section and we'll try to field them to our panelists as we move forward. All right, so let's begin with how we challenge the status quo in a male-dominated environment. Just keeping in mind this year's theme of International Women's Day, which is choose to challenge. Aisha, let me begin with you. At the time you were really getting into your photography career, there were no female photographers in northern Nigeria. How did you break into that space?
Well, hello, thank you so much for having me. I think this is an exceptional topic for the day. Well, for me, it was one of those things where I had photography as a hobby before deciding later on that I wanted to do it full time. And it was mainly because there were so many opportunities that were wasting. We had so many stories that were untold. And as you said, at the time, we're talking probably 10, 12 years ago, there were hardly no female photographers. I only knew of one other northern Nigerian photographer who was based in London at the time. Her name was also Aisha. So it was an opportunity to be able to tell our stories from our perspective. And I felt there was a gap that needed to be filled. So that's how I ended up becoming a full-time photographer.
Incredible. And, speaking of another woman who broke the mold, if you will, Gulshan, you were the first African female stringer for AFP in the continent. How did you make a case for your work? I'm curious, in an industry that the gaze has predominantly still is white and male. So how did you kind of use your voice through the lens?
Hi, thank you, Victoria. Thank you for having me, everyone. So I was the first regular female stringer. So for example, I was called on regularly, given commissions and given assignments, and this was in 2017. To answer your question, it was tough. I mean, I was pushing stories that were not ordinarily seen or were not what the sort of market, an international market, was used to. So it took a little bit of convincing when it came to editors or whoever we were working with. I think once my work started getting sort of traction and recognized, and I started doing it anyway, regardless of editors accepting the work and putting it on my own platforms. And I think that's the power of social media, also Instagram and such platforms that has kind of, in a way and to a certain degree, equalized, well, not equalized, but kind of opened up the field for other people to be able to view work that would ordinarily not be seen in mainstream media. So I was pushing my work on those platforms as such, just putting up work and hoping that they would be seen and then editors were interested. And that's what started getting the more closed-minded in you know, editors or to start thinking that perhaps there are stories that needed to be seen, that needed to be heard, and were not the ones that were commonly bought or played, paid attention to, so to speak. So it was a challenge, to answer your question, and it still is a challenge, but we're making strides.
And speaking of making strides, Irene, let me bring you in here. You do a lot of work that has to do with uplifting women entrepreneurs across Africa. You know, what are some of the common hurdles that you've seen them encounter as they're trying to scale and grow their businesses and get, you know, their profiles out there?
Sorry, that's a question for me, Victoria?
Sorry, that was going to Irene.
Okay.
Thank you, Victoria, and thank you, Canon, for the opportunity to be here and share insights. Yes, as at AWIF, Africa Women Innovation and Entrepreneurship Forum, our work is to support female entrepreneurship on the continent. And to do that, of course, we started with realizing the realization that women do not have equal economic opportunities or equal opportunity to be entrepreneurs. So there is a gap there in female in entrepreneurship on the continent, and our work is to close that gap. So we identified the challenges, the barriers. They go from inequality in accessing finance, which is the most important ingredient in starting and growing a business. It's also inequality in accessing market, okay? Supply chains, be they government procurement or corporate sector procurement, women have limited access to these opportunities. The barriers also go to networks. You know, women do not have as easily access to networks as men do. You also get that in the corporate sector, not only in the business sector. It's usually typically men's club kind of a thing. And then another very important challenge barrier is skills, entrepreneurship skills. So our organization, what we do is to work around these issues, these challenges. We create a specific women-focused programs. We design them, and then we try to support women, especially the young, emerging entrepreneurs, startups, you know, to help them. We facilitate access to finance. We facilitate access to market. We then, of course, roll out a capacity building, entrepreneurial capacity building programs to support them. And we have the AWIF network itself, where they connect, you know, peer-to-peer connections, interactions, powerful, where they see other women who have been able to surmount those hurdles, where they connect and learn from each other. Peer-to-peer learning is a powerful thing, and where they can share their experiences, their successes. We also have a program whereby we showcase and celebrate success stories. That's the AWIF Awards. And that also helps a lot because all the women who have won in different categories of the AWIF Awards, they have gone ahead. The profiling, the exposure, the pride, the recognition itself, you know, being recognized for excellence in what you are doing, it goes a long way in helping them. So these are what we are doing. And sector-wise, you have different sectors of business that are so male-dominated, and women have a lot of difficulties penetrating and operating in these sectors, especially the science and technology sectors. Think of the energy sector, think of all tech sectors, health tech, fintech, agri-tech, and all that. So we also have programs that try to get women to participate, you know, to create more participation for women in these sectors.
And fantastic to hear what you're doing, Irene, in that space, and just uplifting and capacitating women to be better and do better across the continent. Sarah, when you look at the photography industry, and coming back to that, there's such a huge imbalance when it comes to the commissioning of work, exhibitions, just general publication of work. And I remember we were having this discussion, particularly when it comes to commissioning of work from bigger and well-known publications in the West, right? So they'll kind of fly in a foreign photographer and not necessarily look for local talent, But something really interesting happened during the pandemic because flights weren't happening, borders were closed. And so they were now forced to look at the local pool of talent, if you will. How did that change dynamics in terms of opportunities for local photographers and more specifically for women?
So I think that it's quite sad or telling that it took something that drastic for them to even start looking at the local pool. But that is what happened. An example of an organization that reached out during that time, they said something along the lines of, since we can't fly our photographers out, we now are looking for someone there. So the language itself was condescending. Almost to say like, because we can't, then I guess we'll just use one of you, So it's almost like they were forced to, and fine, there have been a lot more opportunities for local-based photographers. And of course we welcome that, but, it would be nice to be considered, on an everyday basis, for there not to be a pandemic, for opportunities to open up. So while it did open up opportunities for us, I think it's because of the circumstances. So what happens when the pandemic is over? God knows when that will be, or what happens when the travel restrictions, when the West get all the vaccines, because right now they're hoarding all the vaccines. Are they now going to be okay sending back, flying in there, parachuting in the journalists? So it's a game. We are waiting to see, but yes, opportunities opened up, and I guess we'll see in the coming months what happens.
No, absolutely. I mean, I hope that this kind of opens up more doors so local talent can show what they indeed have to offer. Aisha, when we talk about female photographers, making their mark through their work, I know you particularly don't like the term female photographer. You said, the camera can't tell the difference. Yes. But, let's be honest, there's something unique and different that you do bring to your assignments by virtue of being a woman, and what can you say that is whenever you capture a moment?
Well, I think from what I had based on a couple of discussions in the past, my work has strongly been focused on identity and also changing stereotypes. And that really comes from the bias that we get from being women generally. You have men telling our stories from their perspectives, and sometimes even we tell our stories with a certain bias. But with my background in communications, I've understood that you should be able to tell it as it is, or be able to tell both sides of the story. So what I bring to the table is I ensure that I try to be as neutral as possible, but also pushing and ensuring that identity of being a woman or cultural identity, are different traditions, especially with where I'm from. Like I said, in northern Nigeria in the past, we have something called Bashiga, which means no entry. And most houses would have it on the door, which means no men are allowed. And in those kind of situations, you cannot access stories that most especially affect women. And we also have this culture of silence where whatever it is we're going through in life, we tend to keep it in. We're meant to be strong. We're meant to be able to deal. There's a lot of shame that comes with expressing ourselves. So I think for me, photography has strongly helped in building that voice, being able to share our stories, being able to change the ideas and the thought processes of people just by the photographs that we put out there. So it's a very, very strong tool, which, like I said, does not care whether you're a girl or a boy. I think it's the mindset that comes with it, and how you're able to utilize the tool. So that for me has been a strong way of using this voice that I found to portray as much as I can of where I'm from and what we do and how we do things. Thank you.
Thanks, Aisha. And I know you mentioned some time back that people are more receptive to you as a female photographer as well.
Yes, that is true. I think where I am today has a lot to do with me being female, because I had colleagues who knew a lot more about photography than I did in the past. But just because I'm a female, if we're 10 people doing an exhibition and they come to mind, they're like, wow, how were you able to do this? Just that comes from the fact that this is a female and they're not used to it. So that has created major opportunities for me to get to where I am today, being able to just stand out in a crowd. And also when there's a crowd of photographers, we know how it is when we want to get a story, especially when it's journalism and you want to catch that shot, you get shoved and pushed to the side. But being female, a lot of times, some people would actually pull me to the front and be like, why don't you come quickly get your shot? And that's just because I'm a girl. They're not going to do that for their male colleagues. So it comes with its good and bad. But for me, it's been mostly good, honestly. It's been really great for me as a female photographer.
Well, Gulshan, it's interesting. You kind of sit on the other end of the spectrum in that you feel you still need to be classified as a female photographer. Why do you feel this is important?
Well, I mean, I agree with Aisha in the sense of not wanting to be marginalized as a woman, as a female photographer. So in those situations, I think that ideally we all want to be treated equally and with equal respect and dignity. We have the same we're all have on the path of the same skills or can do these assignments equally as well. So in the sense of not wanting to be marginalized, yes, I want to be known as a photographer and be treated equally. In a sense of advocacy and understanding that we come from a disadvantaged background being women historically. The iconography of photography has been created by a traditionally white male gaze. So in that sense, I think it is important to recognize where we are still and how far we have to go. So in the same way we talk about gender issues or Black Lives Matter, for example, it's a matter of focusing our attention on specific identities and how we've not reached equality yet, and we have to do work still. And I think just the fact that we still have, for example, the first Black woman to do this, or the first queer person to do this, or this sort of thing that's marking it in history in the year 2021 or 2020 needs for us to measure our progress. In the same sense of the fact that we need advocacy through sort of collaboratives like African Women Photographers, which Sarah has founded. She can talk more about that, or Women Photograph. These sort of organizations that promote women photography, female photography. So I think in those situations, it is necessary, like in a situation like this, for example, today we're having this discussion and it's amongst women specifically. So it's a sort of focus area. So yeah, I think it is still necessary to be identified in these situations as a woman and as a photographer.
Certainly. And, it's interesting you said it, to say that we have the first female anything in 2021. I mean, it should not be the case, but this is where we are. Irene, just talking about how to make your mark or to make an impression, if you will, but now specifically to the corporate space, really has to do with how high up you are in the corporate ladder. Right. And that's just being honest. You have a lot more influence in terms of decisions that you can make to open doors for maybe other women or other disadvantaged groups. You sit on boards, you sit at the decision-making table. From where you sit, what are some things that you feel hinder women from making their mark in the corporate space, and how can they break through that space and get to the boardrooms like where you are?
Yeah, I think one of the things holding women back is, of course, the gender bias itself, sometimes that are embedded in our policies, in our government policies, either not giving women equal opportunities or totally excluding them. And then if you take it from away from policy, take it into the corporate sectors, there are, you don't have that many, especially in Africa, you don't have that many corporate organizations that go out of their way to really ensure that gender equality is fully embedded in all their in their system. So the system is built to exclude women. So that is one of the things. Then women in themselves kind of try to perpetuate that there is that sometimes is the lack of self-confidence. Okay, so if you believe in that you are not capable enough, then it becomes a reality. So you get some women who have the problems of not having enough self-confidence in their ability and in what they can do. So that is another one. There is also so the issue of other women who are there and who should be fighting to let other women in. So we have so many of them. I must speak for women. Women on boards. I think I haven't seen any woman who is there and who is outrightly trying to not let in other women. So as women, we have come to the realization that if we get to the top, as many of us do, that we should also ensure that the door doesn't close with us, that we try to leave that door open for other women to come in. And we are doing that. So, but it's about also building confidence and being assertive, unapologetic about your success and your capability, delivering outstanding results. Unfortunately, this is a reality. As women, we have to do 3 times as much and deliver 3 times as much and prove ourselves 3 times as much to be able to be accepted. So we have to continue doing that, fighting, but it's opening up. It's slow, but it's happening. The awareness is there globally, internationally, international organization, the SDGs, start since 2025, bring it to Africa, the African Union, we have the Agenda 2063, which has women empowerment embedded in it. So, and corporates, they are also now becoming more aware of the importance of gender equality and gender equity. Thank you.
And I hope with that awareness, the needle starts to kind of shift in favor of women. Sarah, when you talk about photography in the industry, for a long time, decision makers made sure it was very exclusive. There was a lot of gatekeeping, and that was before, and Gulshan actually mentioned this, social media kind of came into play, right? And allowed for photographers to self-publish and, maybe tag a big industry player to showcase their work. How has this dynamic changed the game in your view?
I think social media absolutely changed the game. Before when publications were parachuting in journalists, and they would say things like, well, we don't know where to find local photographers. Well, that's not an excuse anymore. They're all over social media. If you want to find someone somewhere, you're gonna find them. But also just the fact that so they were probably using the same photographers, and and then here locally, then we wouldn't have had a place to show our work. Which gallery spaces or which publications. But what happened is with social media, you were able to to do your photography and to publish it, and then and then people kind of started to pay attention, and you were able to get your work out there. And I think that that was huge because, like, again, you didn't need anyone's permission to publish that work. And, it kind of became a space where, someone likes your work on social media and they reach out and say, hey, I saw your work on Instagram and I'm wondering if you can do this or that. So it really did open the industry up in general and just kind of gave opportunity, particularly, us here, who kind of don't have our own publications to kind of, be on the same level or kind of bid for the same types of jobs that they were kind of, flying in journalists to do.
And, actually, I wonder with that kind of influence and pull that a photographer can now create on their own terms, I remember when we were talking earlier, you said photography has become more empowering on the continent. How would you say this has happened?
Well, I'll use Nigeria, for example. Now, within the political and government space, we have so many photographers now because a politician can't come and say, I've done this work without proof anymore. Like, photography is now a big deal. When we started out, I joined the government space in 2015, and that was mainly what took me there. It was like a way of bridging the gap between the people and the government using storytelling and photography. And I currently work with the special advisor of I'm the special advisor to the Minister of Finance now. And photography is a big deal because generally, even when you're thinking of the communications plan, that is what photography and videography is a strong part of the communication plan. And I currently know at least within the major top 30 government officials all have photographers assigned to them on a daily basis. So when you say empowerment, it's not just empowering just the people, but even giving the people that space to be able to hold people accountable by saying, if I go to the village and you've claimed you've done a certain job, I can get a photograph of it, put it up on social media, which is why social media is also a strong force, and say, you've not done it. And where's the proof? This is what we've seen on ground. So you're able to keep people accountable. And photography plays a huge part in that. And in empowering the people also, when you're able to share your own story, I know that social media has been a strong force for me because starting from Shutter Chance, Facebook, Instagram, these are spaces that I've been able to tell my story, put up my own personal diary. And that in itself has inspired so many others to be able to say, okay, you know what, I'm going to do this. I'm going to go learn. I'm going to study photography. This is what I want to do as a young person, and tell their parents. And their parents are able to see these stories online and say, wow, okay, you can actually make a living from this. You could actually create change from this. So I think social media photography, the empowerment of human beings in general, it's been such a strong force.
Absolutely, and that kind of reinforces the whole idea that photographers are more than capable to capture their own realities, their stories, their narratives at home. And which kind of is the perfect segue into the next question for you, Gulshan, which is challenging the idea that photographers from the global South are not commissioned to capture life in the global North. Hardly ever, despite the inverse happening all of the time. How can that, really be challenged where it's okay? If you're an African photographer, you can head over to some European city, capture life there and commissioned to do work there. But, how can that happen in a practical sense?
That is a very good question in terms of, but I think to begin with, there needs to be a mind shift, a massive mind shift. And I'm going to use an example to illustrate this point. I was traveling for work 2 years ago, and an editor who found out through social media that I was in the country said to me, Gulshan, why didn't you let us know? And this was a European country. And why didn't you let us know you were here? And I, already in my own unconscious bias, responded by saying, I didn't think that you'd consider me. You have your own photographers here. And then she says, no, but what about your perspective, which is unique? Everyone has their own perspective, which is unique, And I realized that, and I thought, wow, we're still, and I think I said this to you previously when we chatted. sometimes I feel as South Africans, because we I grew up in the tail end of apartheid. It's almost like we're still operating with a foot on our necks, and we have to learn how to not do that to ourselves. And then the next day when I decided, okay, I'm going to contact editors here, and I said to another editor, well, I am here and I am available. And she said to me, and again, this was another European editor, and she says, oh, but why should we use you? I mean, there's a language barrier, how are you going to work here? And then I thought about that, and I thought, but since time immemorial, Westerners were coming to the continent and they never thought that there's a language barrier and they can't report on here. I mean, in South Africa alone, we speak 11 different languages that is official. There's more than that, of course. So, I mean, there needs to be a massive shift in our biases. The other one is, I remember at the World Press Photo Festival a few years ago, when someone asked the question of how can we let people photograph their own communities? And we were talking in the context of Africa, the continent. And she says, how should we let people photograph their own communities? Wouldn't there be, favoritism or bias or this sort of thing? And this is so bizarre for me because, I mean, you coming with a bias as well. Every single person comes in with their own references and unconscious biases. And it is my belief that you are in your images. You choose what to put in your frame and what you leave out of your frame. And that in itself is, it's not objective. I think there's a myth of objectivity that we need to deal with, that the fact that we say there's a white gaze, or the concept of the white gaze, and sort of responding to that now means that there is a specific perspective that each and every person comes with. And this also means that each and every person can bring their value within their own perspective, or just a different opinion even. So yes, to answer the question, to do it in a practical way, I think it begins with changing minds and interrogating our own ideas of how we think the industry should work. And in that, it is then those people who hold the power to begin making these changes.
I want to kind of carry that thought forward and bring Sarah in on that. We've talked about the unconscious bias that exists among Western publications, but they're not always going to be the problem. What about among local photographers who could be blinded to their own unconscious bias, right? And I remember we were having this conversation that just because you're Black, African, or a woman, you can do no wrong. You can't cross lines in terms of being decent or indecent with your work. How does a photographer kind of navigate the power that they carry with their lens as they're telling the story?
That's a great question. And I think an important one especially for emerging photographers. I think when we look at how the white photographers come in, Western photographers come in, and with this gaze, the way that they see us is going to be different from how we see us, right? And a lot of that work, a lot of the publications are not really made for us, right? They're made for them. So they want to see us the way they've always seen us. And, I guess their photographers kind of deliver those types of images for them, right? The problem is, apart from probably South Africa, there are very few institutions, that teach photography on the continent. And so, when you look at competitions such as World Press Photo, when you look at winning images, right? There are a lot of times are kind of captured with a white gaze, right? So it'll be a white photographer who has won this image of a person somewhere in Africa on some sort of situation, right? So what happens is for a young African photographer, they might begin to say, hey, those are the types of images that win. Those are the types of images that I need to take. So then you get this emulation of, this is what a good image looks like. So when you go into your own community, you might start to now create photos that kind of look like that, right? So as much as you are maybe from a community, I think there are also certain ethical considerations that that you still need to take. Being conscious of of how you photograph people, being conscious of consent, being conscious of all these things, that just because you're Black or a woman or a person from a certain community, that doesn't give you the right to rob a person of their ability to participate and of how they're seen as well. So I think we have just as much responsibility when we photograph our own stories to keep in mind that there are also we still are have to fall under the same or consider the same ethical kind of considerations. I don't think you get a pass just for being a member of a minority.
Certainly, and let's kind of shift gears a bit to Irene, the corporate space. You mentioned earlier that at times companies don't seem as invested in the whole gender equality, agenda, if you will, and it's actually it's backed up by data. The McKinsey report, recent one done, suggested that many African organizations don't take gender issues seriously enough. Only 1 in 3 companies in the private sector cite gender diversity as a CEO priority, right? And so how do you move companies from thinking about gender equality as something nice to have to a real part of their strategy and really putting their money where their mouth is and investing in it? How do they make that shift?
Yeah, Victoria, it's a difficult shift to make, because Africa per se as a continent is a patriarchal, continent, So there is already that cultural, bias against women. Okay, how far they can get and how appropriate it is for them to be in such spaces. So, and you have African corporate sector being run by African men, okay, and a few African women. So it is a difficult thing to, barrier to gap to bridge. But I see what needs to happen is a concerted, integrated effort, by government policymakers that must make policies, that bind corporate companies to abide by, so make gender sensitive policies that will bind companies, to really walk their talk, have gender effective gender policies, corporate policies themselves, and also the government that must work to ensure implementation and regulation of those policies. So when the government comes up with the policies, then we talk of government putting measures in place to enforce regulation, and then working with the corporates, to ensure that they have these policies and implement them. And then we are hoping that as more women get into the C-suite in the corporate sector, that they, being women, would take these issues more seriously, and then come out with more policies and programs to support the growth of women in the corporate sector and to more inclusion in the boards, and also because it makes economic sense. It's not just a right, it's just not a human right, that as women, as human beings, as half of the continent's population, it is our right, to have those things, to have those equal opportunities in the political space, in the economy, in the social space. So it is a right, but then it also is it makes economic sense. Many research studies, analysis, they have all, proven that where you have men and women having equal opportunities, that you have more business outcomes, and you have economic development, and that's what we need on the continent. Thank you.
Absolutely, Irene. And, the case definitely has been made in terms of why we need to open up the space for more women in the corporate sector, and not just the corporate sector, just generally across various fields. Aisha, let me come to you in terms of how critical collaboration and networking is in the photography industry, when it comes to getting ahead, using those networks. I know you also talked about that as well, to ensure that your work is scaled, it's seen, it has impact.
Well, collaboration has been really strong for me because early on, like I said, I did not have access to many photographers. So the few enthusiasts that we're able to get from day one, I've had different cooperatives where we've come together, from the Photo Wagon, there's Photo Waka Africa, there's the different, now we have like the Nigerian Photography Expo and Conference, the Abuja photography groups. And what that does for you is you have, first of all, you're able to bounce off ideas. When you have photographs, you're able to share with people that also have an understanding of what photography means. They have connections who have connections that can also push for support. I know there are many times I've not been able to get commission for a job, and I send it to the next person that I know, because you really will look at the people around you first most times. So when it comes to networking, almost all the exhibitions I've done, it was someone who said, well, I know this photographer. So that has been able to push me on the scale of not just being in Nigeria, but even on the international scale. Being around your network is a very strong thing. It's a big deal, because once people know what you're good at, they're able to say, okay, I know a certain person who's great at product photography. So even if a general conversation comes up and there's an aspect of that, someone who knows you would pick that up and support. Same goes for even the use of cameras. In places like where I'm from, it's very hard to find where to rent cameras. Very hard. So a lot of times, depending on the type of lenses you want, you may not be able to afford to have the whole kit, but someone else has an 85 mm 65 macro. Someone has a 70-200 that could do the job for you, or 400 mm that could do the job for you, that would loan it to you. And that's just because you happen to be around their network. So it's a very empowering thing to get to know others. And they also help you to learn about yourself and about the kind of photography you want to do. So I gave an example of the only person that I met, Aisha, who was a Northern Nigerian, and she was in London. And every time she would come down to Nigeria, we would end up just sitting in a studio, just playing around. And I realized I wasn't a fan of studio photography, and that's what she loved to do. She did a lot of studio work. I would rather be outside in the field. And it took playing around with this friend of mine to understand that this is what I loved. So I think your network is very important. It really helps. It connects. I can use an example of even having, let's say you want to have a photography project and you need sponsors. It almost always is someone who knows someone that connects you with the sponsors that would support your event. So that also builds up and empowers you to do better and do things bigger. So network is key.
Absolutely. I can never underestimate the power of references and, friends in the industry. Gulshan, we're talking about success and getting to the place that you are now in terms of visibility and getting your work out there. How along the journey have you positioned yourself, or would you say it's kind of organically happened for you?
Victoria, my journey has largely been organic. And I'm very grateful for also what Aisha was talking about in terms of community and having met people, or having had one or two women in my circles who were so supportive and would advised to say, why don't you apply for this portfolio review, which I've never even heard of? Or why don't you, speak to this person? And I mean, I was in the beginning, it was even a question of how do we speak to, how do you approach? I didn't know how to navigate the industry. And having that sort of building of community, which I think is still largely lacking, it's getting better on the continent, but I think there needs to be more sort of localized basis to have these sort of exchange of information and exchange of knowledge. And, I remember thinking at some point in my career very early on, which was like 2 years ago, that, I wonder how come people were not sharing this information, because obviously it was just a small group of people who were being assigned or who were being hired, and they were not sharing almost. That's what it seemed like to me. And I think I want to operate from a place of abundance. If I had knew some of the things I know now a few years ago, things might have been a lot more easier for me in terms of even just support or understanding things, or just less stress. So for me, it has been largely organic, and I'm grateful to have come across opportunities, but also people have reached out to me a lot. And I think that's just a matter of being true to your voice, despite everyone else trying to influence you a certain way. Like Sarah has referenced how we look at pictures that would historically win awards, and you can easily be influenced to make the same sort of imagery. But in my gut, I felt like there's something that needs to change here. I need to be true to myself. I need to, be close to myself when I'm photographing and when I'm engaging with people. And I think that, especially for emerging photographers to realize, is very important. And that is what will, in the end, I believe, get you recognized by the right people. And people automatically approach you. So for me, like I said, it's been largely organic. I'm very grateful. And it's a tough one because you're managing, putting food on the table and getting assignments, but also being true to yourself and pushing the stories that that you feel are important to you. But it's all about finding that balance, I think. And hopefully more and more people are starting to realize that there's such a vast arrangement of as many people as there are in this world, there are as many stories. And, we can all learn from each other, and we all deserve to be seen and heard and recognized and respected.
Oh, you're right. We certainly can't run out of stories to tell. And, especially with the last year that it has been, 2020, my goodness, you can only imagine the books that will be written as a result of going through the pandemic. Sarah, let me come to you, because, this theme has kind of been shared in different ways through the conversation, in that when you're a woman who's kind of made it ahead, you're at the top, you're making decisions now. And I remember Michelle Obama had also made the same reference that once you get to the top, hold the door open for the women who will be coming behind you. And I just want to kind of ask you the importance of mentorship. I know it's something that you're very passionate about, especially when it comes to female photographers across the continent. But how important is it in this industry?
First, let me just apologize for disappearing briefly. Yes, this is Africa and these things happen. Anyway, so I think mentorship is extremely important. I started African Women in Photography, for that very reason, or for one of the reasons rather, because I think if you walk into any situation blind, it might take you a lot longer to get to where you need to be. But I think that, when you have people who have been there, people who have, and I don't know about the top, but who have, kind of advanced somewhat in their career, that, the information that you get from them is invaluable. And I think, I get questions now that range from, how much should I charge to, I'm not sure, what this person is asking. Just, anything from, what should I charge to, is this a good edit to send out to an editor? How should I be editing my photos? And so African women in photography, whether it's trying to hold an obviously online webinar now, that can be informative in a variety of topics, whether it's just one-on-one, like, hey, I need to reach out to someone who knows about this, or whether it's sharing opportunities, all those types of things that come out of a community, I think is absolutely beneficial, rather than kind of walking alone. I mean, I think, walking with others definitely gets you further than walking alone.
It certainly does. It certainly does. And just a quick reminder to those watching us, if you have any questions or comments for our panelists, please share them in the comment section on LinkedIn and Facebook as well. Irene, just keeping on that same theme of success, you mentioned earlier how you have the AWIF Awards every year to recognize women doing amazing things in different fields. And so I know you've come across a lot of amazing success stories. And, what are some insights that you could share just from the journeys of the women that you celebrate every year, and maybe from your own journey as well?
Yeah, what insight can I share about the women that we celebrate every year? They come with different, things from dynamic, exceptional women. Of course, they are women that operate in different sectors. So you see, and celebrating them, recognizing their achievements is something really, really very powerful, because it makes them feel good, that they have done something good, and that somebody has appreciated their work. And that is actually how they scale, many of them, because that starts to attract potential investors or people wanting to them to supply, to be their suppliers, or all that. So, but you are dealing with women who are exceptional role models, for other women, because they have done it. And many of them operating in different sectors, agriculture, where you have a lot of women, 70% of women in Africa, agricultural activity in Africa is in the hands of women, but it's essentially in smallholder farming, rural farming. So when you have those women who are able to climb up the value chain and prove that they can do it, and successfully. So they are great role models for the others. So we get them in different shapes. We have them in the creative industries, like our three exceptional photographers now. It's such a pleasure for me, hearing these exchanges from them, famous photographers and all that. Also in the media, other creative industry operators. We have them in manufacturing, in the tech sector. So we celebrate them, we profile them, and then we help them to, to scale. We attract and we connect them, to other opportunities. So, it's motivating for other entrepreneurs, because every year they are striving to be the winners. So that is what it does. It's a powerful tool of motivating others, showing them that, okay, there is this person who has done it, as role models. In my own space, is what motivates me is seeing those success stories. That is what kind of drives me. Maybe something else was driving me in my previous career before I started doing this. But now, what drives me is seeing the success of women as entrepreneurs, creating jobs, building, the African economy.
Fantastic. And, I want to we have a few minutes to go in the session, and I want to end on a note of hope. It's been an extraordinarily difficult year, and still a very difficult period for many across the world. But, there's always a silver lining. And I want to kind of get that from each of you as we wrap up in terms of, what gives you hope about the continent? What gives you hope about being a woman? What gives you hope about the photography industry? And what emerging opportunities are out there that women photographers, women entrepreneurs can tap into. So Aisha, I'll begin with you.
Okay, thank you. I think it's been such an inspirational month. If we look at all the different news articles that have been coming up, there's First Woman this, First Woman that. There's so many of them this month. So I think we definitely needed that to take us out of the COVID fatigue, to be able to see these kind of people and say, okay, I could be one of these people, or my child could become one of these people. So it's showing us that the world is changing. But with COVID and what we went through, when you say hope, I always look back at the video of all the animals, just being happy with us being awake. And I think we need to be able to remember our humanity and remember that we're human first, regardless of all the things that we see and all the things that we strive for. COVID has taught us to just go back to the drawing board and know and look at what is important for us. So I think there's hope. We're speaking about mental health. We're speaking about women empowerment, the eradication of gender-based violence. There's so many issues that connect to women today that were taboo topics in the past. So I think there's real hope in that. And that has really inspired me to do more. So I think we should look into that also. Thank you.
Awesome. Gulshan?
Without reiterating what Aisha has so beautifully articulated, I also think, it has been a time, despite all our losses in terms of the pandemic, and, we pay respects to those, the people who we've lost in this time. It has been a time for transformation and a time for healing. And now more than ever, like Aisha said, we're having conversations. And I think so much goodness can come from just having conversations. And so we need to keep this momentum going. We need to recognize that we can only shine by sort of being rubbed up against each other. And that's sometimes a challenge, it makes us uncomfortable. It stretches our perceptions and puts us in places we've never been before. And this needs to happen. This is the only way we're going to progress and become better. And in terms of photography and the world of visuals, I think, images and visuals are so instructive. Visual literacy is something that spans or is more common than literacy itself, learning to read and write, where we can learn from pictures and get our cues from pictures. And so our positioning in this world is very, very, very valuable, and also something that's a great responsibility. And I'm hoping that with these conversations in the industry and how we're starting to understand each other better and understanding the challenges, we are now, in effect, making strides towards even bettering our humanity and our understanding for each other. And this is wonderful. I mean, this gives me so much of more hope and so much of inspiration. And I hope to continue the learning and to continue having these conversations with strong women, and to build more community and to share in solidarity and to learn from each other, and to, I'm excited about it. Thank you, Victoria.
Thanks, Gulshan. I'll come to Irene and then Sarah.
Okay. Yeah. What gives me hope, Victoria, is first that as women, we are resilient, by nature. And then we realize that these are exciting times, for Africa, really, really, in every sense of the word. We have a lot of women, like Aisha said at the beginning, a lot of good news about women, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, all out of Africa. If you also go to my LinkedIn page, you will see that I was so excited about the Tanzanian vice president becoming the first president of East Africa. So all these things, so we have great things about women happening. And then what gives me hope is that women are now aware, especially young women, they are aware of their rights, they are aware of the need for more gender equality, more gender balanced, situations. And they are coming out, they are becoming more courageous. Those of us, organizations like us, and Sarah mentioned, creating platforms, for them that they can leverage, to support what they are doing. You have women, Africa is very, very exciting, now. And I'm very, very happy and hopeful that we are living in these times, and I'm a part of it. I count myself lucky. A lot of innovations, homegrown African innovations coming out of the continent. And many of them are also in the hands of women, youth, young women for that matter. So it's something that excites me. It's something that gives me hope, for the future. And I believe that we have started the war, and we are also gradually, slowly able to get the buy-in of men, okay? There are some men now who are no more feeling as threatened as they were in 2015 when the SDGs came out and there was a specific goal that was gender equality and women's empowerment. Now they understand both socially what it means. If you're a husband, that if you have an economically empowered woman, that it helps the family, it helps the community, it helps the country. So we are also gradually getting that male buy-in, which is very critical, very important. We cannot win these discussions by just talking to ourselves. We include the men and we convince them, and we get eventually we'll reach our goals. But I'm excited, I'm hopeful, it gives me hope. We are resilient and we are capable. So we can do it. Thank you.
Yes, we can, in the words of Barack Obama. Sarah, to you.
I think you've all said such amazing things, and kind of not to reiterate or to repeat what you've said. I think COVID has really been quite a dark time, but I think there's also been light. Irene mentioned, the woman president in Tanzania, first for East Africa. I mean, that's super exciting. But I think that this time has kind of shown us kind of the value, of life. How fickle it can be, and just to get us to consider. Consider our place. What is our place, and what can we do in this short life to kind of make a difference and make an impact. I think that out of this time too, has been amazing kind of innovation. People have learned how to work without being physically present in spaces. People connecting over the internet with people who you never thought that you could connect with, or even hearing from, with all the kind of the classes that have been offered, and all the opportunities to kind of listen in on various workshops. And I think that innovation has also opened up space, which may not have happened before. And I think that as photographers, even though the pandemic has kind of limited our ability to travel, to create stories, I think that it has kind of made us look inward, look closer for stories. And maybe those are the stories that really need to be told. Maybe that's where our focus needs to be. And yeah, as we kind of look inward for ourselves, perhaps that'll kind of direct us in the way that we need to go in the future.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you so much to Irene, Aisha, Sarah, and Gulshan for your time, your insights. A lot to digest after this conversation, but I love that it's been left at a place of hope and optimism for the continent, for women. It's an amazing time, as Irene said, to be alive and to be living on this beautiful, great continent of ours. Thank you so much once again. And keep the conversations going on social media as well. If you're still with us on LinkedIn and Facebook, thank you for sticking around with us to the end. Of course, we'll have another topic, some great panelists as well in the next month of April. Keep your eyes on the LinkedIn and Facebook pages to find out what the next topic will be. As always, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure being your host for this session. My name is Victoria Rubadiri. Goodbye, good night, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you're joining us from the world. Bye.